constantly engaged in common material activities, but factually be completely absorbed in Krishna's service. Right, so that's what's being said here in the verse and the purport. Now, that may seem contradictory. It may seem hard to understand. It may seem difficult to perceive. Because generally we hear that if you're engaged in material activities, then you're not engaging in spiritual activities, right? But if we examine this, we can actually begin to understand it. So that's the thesis. So the reason that thesis holds truth is because it's supported in Shastra. So while normal actions, which we generally know them as karma, they generally produce a reaction. We learn from the Bhagavad Gita in the 4th chapter that there is also forbidden action, which is called vikarma, and there's also inaction, which is called akarma. So actions that follow the guidelines of the Shastras and produce a positive material reaction are known as karma. Then there's the actions that go against what the Shastra says, and they yield a negative material reaction. Those are known as vikarma. And then apart from those, so apart from these two, the positive material action reaction and the negative material action reaction, there's also following the Shastra, but with the mood of detachment, right? And this is called akarma. So a lot of times we can confuse these, right? We can get confused because one might say, well, if you're following what the Shastra says, you're doing the right thing, then that's good, yeah? And that's good materially. But if you're doing it for the purpose of your own personal sense gratification, if you consider yourself the doer, the controller, the enjoyer, then it's going to cause further karmic bondage. It's positive material karmic bondage, but it's karmic bondage nonetheless, right? It's temporary, and it doesn't support our eternal nature. So in order to understand what akarma or inaction truly is, we have to understand what our relationship is with Krishna. We have to understand that we are just an instrumental servant to the Supreme Doer. And this has to be without any tinge of a desire to control anything separately from the Supreme Lord. And the reason these types of actions or activities are actually classified as inaction is because they don't produce a material result, right? So the positive karma can look a lot like akarma because essentially, externally, you're doing the same activities. But a devotee of the Supreme Lord, they're doing those activities not for themselves, not to enjoy the fruits, but they're doing it to serve Krishna, right? So there's no material reaction when one is completely engaged in the service of Krishna. So in Bhagavad Gita, I mentioned the 4th chapter talks about this. Text 17 says that the intricacies of action are very hard to understand, right? Because it can get confusing. We talked about it and it sounds a little confusing because two of them sort of sound very similar. Sri Krishna continues, therefore, one should know properly what action is, what forbidden action is, and what inaction is. So what karma is, what vikarma is, and what akarma is. And then in his purport to this verse in Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada writes, if one is serious about liberation from material bondage, one has to understand the distinctions between action, inaction, and unauthorized actions, right? So one has to understand this. Then Srila Prabhupada continues, one has to apply oneself to such analysis of action, reaction, and perverted actions because it is a very difficult subject matter, right? So first we have to understand it, and then Srila Prabhupada says we have to apply it, right? And the reason is because it's a very difficult subject matter. So we have to understand it properly, and then we have to understand how to apply it. Then Srila Prabhupada continues, to understand Krishna consciousness and action according to its mode, one has to learn one's relationship with the Supreme. In other words, one who has learned perfectly knows that every living entity is an eternal servitor of the Lord, and that consequently one has to act in Krishna consciousness. So I'm going to read those two sentences again, but I'm going to pause. So Srila Prabhupada says, to understand Krishna consciousness and action according to its modes, one has to learn one's relationship with the Supreme. Does that sound like anything familiar? When Lord Chaitanya was explaining the language of the Vedas and how we can understand, how we can analyze what the Vedas is saying, he gives three things that we can look for in the Vedas to understand what's going on. And this is the first one, the relationship between the living being and the Supreme Lord. Does anyone know the Sanskrit term for this?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. I think
Yes.
Sambandh Abhideya Prayojan.
Right. So this one's Sambandha, that first sentence. Very good. Thank you. Then the next sentence the continuation of this, and there's the semicolon. So one who has learned perfectly knows that every living entity is the eternal servitor of the Lord, again, which is Sambandha, and that consequently, because he knows that, one has to act in Krishna consciousness. And this is the Abhideya part, right? To act accordingly. So not just to understand it, to apply it. So we see that Srila Prabhupada in this purport, he's talking about Sambandha and Abhideya. He's using the terms understand and apply, and he's showing that understanding means to understand the relationship, not just understand something theoretically, to truly know what the relationship is between ourselves and the Supreme Lord, and to act accordingly, right? Because if everything comes from Krishna, everything belongs to Krishna, then we should use everything according to his will, his desire. It shouldn't be according to our own individual will, our own desire, right? So when we can understand this through the instructions of Bhagavad Gita, as given by our spiritual masters, as followed and given the example of the sadhus, and as we read through the Shastra, then we can understand what is the difference between action, inaction, and forbidden action. So then Srila Prabhupada continues. The entire Bhagavad Gita is directed toward this conclusion. Any other conclusions against this consciousness and its attendant actions are vikarmas, or prohibitive actions. So this is interesting because we're talking about these three items, karma, akarma, and vikarma. But Srila Prabhupada points out that for an aspiring Vaishnava, it's just vikarma and akarma. Because even karma, which means you're following the Shastra, the rules of the Shastra, but you're doing it for your own personal benefit, Srila Prabhupada, for an aspiring Vaishnava, is saying that is vikarma, that is forbidden action. You can't think that you're the center and expect to make some spiritual advancement. You can make some material advancement. You can go to the heavenly planets, you can enjoy for some time, but that's not our goal. So as aspiring Vaishnavas, there aren't three, akarma, karma, and vikarma. There's just vikarma, prohibited actions, and akarma, inaction, right? Just devotional service. Srila Prabhupada continues, to understand all this, one has to associate with authorities in Krishna consciousness and learn the secret from them. This is as good as learning from the Lord directly. Otherwise, even the most intelligent persons will be bewildered. So Srila Prabhupada is pointing out that Tadvidim Pradipatena, if we want to learn the truth, we have to approach someone who's bona fide, that understands the truth. And since they have seen the truth, they actually have taken darshan of this truth. They see through the eyes of Shastra. They can reveal this truth to us if we approach them in a humble and submissive mood. So this is what Srila Prabhupada is saying. And he's saying otherwise, even if you are the most intelligent being, let alone human, even if you're an intelligent demigod, you will be bewildered if you are not approaching the devotees of the Lord who understand this. We're trying to figure it out on our own power. It means we're engaging in karma or vikarma. It means that we think that we're the center. We're trying to assimilate this knowledge through our own prowess, our own intellectual capacity. But that's not how this knowledge is transferred. This knowledge is transferred through the disciplic succession, right? Even if we are completely unintelligent materially, if we submit, if we have enough sense to submit to a bona fide authority, they can reveal the truth to us. And this is our philosophy. So that's an explanation. So we started with the thesis, which is one can appear to be constantly engaged in common material activities, but factually be completely absorbed in Krishna service. That was the thesis. Then we gave an explanation, the reason why that's true, right? We cited Bhagavad Gita and showed it. So now let's give an example, right? So we've heard it from Shastra. It kind of makes sense, but we needed it to be clarified. Then we got the reasoning sort of spelled out for us. It explains it in a way. But then we also want to know, we want to perceive it, right? We've gotten the Shabda, we've gotten the Anuman. Now we want the Pratyaksha. So practically speaking, how can I understand this, right? So the example we'll give, and I've given this example before, is eating, right? Because everybody eats. Nobody doesn't eat, right? So we also know that there are people who eat the right kind of foods, and there are people that eat the wrong kinds of foods, right? So this basically kind of represents karma and vikarma. If you're eating the right kind of foods, that's karma. If you're eating the wrong kind, that's vikarma, forbidden action, right? If one's eating the right kind of food, that's listed in the Shastra, the right types of food, then one is getting a positive material reaction, which means a more favorable birth, an opportunity to inquire about the absolute. We won't necessarily do that, but we will have the opportunity. And potentially, the result of that is that we can end the suffering that we are experiencing in this material world. If one is eating the wrong types of food, and we understand this also through Shastra, one gets a negative material reaction, right? Which means they get a lower birth, a prolonged stay in this world of perpetual suffering. Eating a lot of meat, for example, you're going to take birth as, an animal such as a tiger who is always eating meat like that, hunting. But it's not so cut and dry. It's not just karma and vikarma, like I said, because you can also follow the Shastra, but do it for the right reason, as we were talking about earlier. So among those who eat the so-called right kind of food, we also know from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verse 13, that one who prepares the food, even if it's according to Shastra, it's the right kind of food, right? One who prepares it for personal sense enjoyment, they're verily eating only sin. Whereas the devotees of the Lord, they're released from all kinds of sin because they eat food which is first offered in sacrifice, right? This is where akarma comes in. Again, I said karma and akarma can look very similar because it just comes down to the consciousness. Both of them are following the same set of rules that are given in the Shastra. They're avoiding certain types of foods. But one of them is doing it for personal sense enjoyment, and the other one is doing it for Krishna's service, right? In the purport of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, text 20, Srila Prabhupada clarifies this point very nicely. He says, a Krishna-conscious person acts out of pure love for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and therefore he has no attraction for the results of the action. No attraction. So if we think that we are a Krishna-conscious person, but we do not fit this description, then we may be mistaken. And by maybe, I mean we are absolutely mistaken. No attraction to the results of the action. That's what Krishna consciousness means. We are aspiring Vaishnavas who are taking to the process of Krishna consciousness, but we are not yet on the platform of Krishna consciousness. We are aware of Krishna, and we're getting to the point that we are becoming more and more conscious of Krishna. But until we have no attraction whatsoever for the results of action, we are not a Krishna conscious person yet. Srila Prabhupada continues. He is not even attached to his personal maintenance, for everything is left to Krishna, nor is he anxious to secure things, nor protect things already in his possession, right? So Srila Prabhupada is saying that he's not hankering for things. He's not lamenting for things that he's lost. He's not trying to even protect the things that he has because he knows that Krishna has given it to me, and Krishna is the only one that can take it from me. It may come through different agents, different thieves, things like that, but Krishna is in control of everything. Not a blade of grass moves without his will. So this is how a person who is completely Krishna conscious lives his life. Now, here's where it gets super interesting, and we have to pay extra close attention. Srila Prabhupada continues that purport. He, a Krishna conscious person, does his duty to the best of his ability and leaves everything to Krishna. Now, this sentence, and I pointed out this before, this sentence seems to be contradictory, because if we're leaving everything to Krishna, why do I have to do anything? But this sentence is saying he does his duty to the best of his ability and leaves everything to Krishna, right? So our tendency, our general tendency is, if we're leaving everything up to somebody, that means we're just going to sit back and relax. I'm not doing anything because, I'm not taking the blame. I'm not responsible. I'm just going to sit back and relax, right? That's our tendency. Or if someone's telling us that we have to do our duty to the best of our ability, you better believe we want the credit when it goes right. If it goes wrong, we'll blame it on somebody else, of course. It was the assistant or the weather, or, we'll come up with something. We're very intelligent when it comes to passing off blame. But what this sentence is saying, what our philosophy is asking of us, is that we put forth our best effort, because that's what we should do for Krishna. He appreciates the effort, right? And we have to be completely detached, because we know that actually the result is up to him. So we always do our best according to our duty, and we offer everything, the entire result, to Krishna. So if it's a complete failure, well, that was Krishna's doing. And if it's a success, that was Krishna's doing. It's not that if it's a success, then, hey, look at me, look at the great job I did. Everyone should, congratulate me. And if it went wrong, like I said, we blame someone. It shouldn't be like that. It should be that we do our absolute best and completely be detached, because we know that Krishna is in control, right? Srila Prabhupada continues, such an unattached person is always freed from the resultant reactions of good and bad. It is as though he were doing nothing. So this is talking about akarma. So since we're talking about examples, we gave the example of food. The example was also given in today's verse of the inhabitants of Vrindavan. So they're engaged in all these different activities. They're cooking, they're eating, they're working, they're sleeping. And Srila Prabhupada pointed out in the purport, one might say, well, hey, they're not doing their, daily pujas and this and that and the other. Actually, they're doing some of those too. But some might say, if they're doing all these different activities, they're out milking cows and cooking and doing all these things, then, where's their sadhana? Where's their meditation? How have they achieved perfection? But Srila Prabhupada pointed out that they're completely absorbed in service of Krishna. So the mothers of Krishna's friends, for example, right? So Krishna and his friends, they go out and they herd the cows, and they're out all day, right? They're out all day. So they need to eat, right? So their mothers are packing them lunch, okay? So when Krishna's friends' mothers are packing them lunch and they're making the preparations, the mothers are actually thinking of Krishna, and they're telling their children, be sure that you give some of this to Krishna. I made this especially for him, right? They're actually making, sure, their kids are also going to eat it, but their consciousness lies in the jewel of Raj, Sri Krishna. That's who they're making it for, right? And this goes for all of them, the cowherd men, right? So they're out also, they're herding the big cows, right? So that the cowherd boys, they're herding the smaller calves. But the older gopas, the fathers of Krishna's friends, they're out and they're herding the bigger cows. And they're doing it in full consciousness of Krishna, because I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but milk, depending on what the cow is eating, will taste very differently. So I have an unfortunate example of this. Anyway, I still have a place in Kentucky. I had a different place in Kentucky where we were having a festival. And we got our milk from another devotee community, was very close by. And unfortunately, their cows got into some wild onion grass, and they were just eating this onion grass. And so we got the milk from them for this festival. And the burfi actually tasted, that we made from that milk actually tasted like onion. It was very unfortunate. So, but for Krishna, for the cowherd men that are herding these cows, they're taking them to very specific pastures where there's this very specific kind of grasses so that they can eat that grass. So their milk tastes extra special. And so that can be offered to Krishna. Everyone's just completely focused on Krishna. Everyone in Braj. the trees, the animals, everything is just completely focused on Krishna's pleasure, serving Krishna, right? So one might say, okay, how can we relate that to our situation though? Because the inhabitants of Raj, they're spontaneously attracted to Krishna, right? We unfortunately were spontaneously attracted to money or fame or comfort or convenience or entertainment, whatever we're spontaneously attracted to here in the material world. And we're wondering, okay, what does that have to do with us? Because there's another unfortunate misunderstanding that many have, is that if we're aware that Krishna is the source of everything, then we're absorbed, actually. We have this, we make this correlation, and it's a misunderstanding. Just because we know in theory that Krishna, everything comes from Krishna, it doesn't mean that we're actually Krishna conscious, as I pointed out before. If we're actually fully absorbed only in pleasing Krishna, and we're not at all concerned with our own, as Srila Prabhupada mentioned, even personal maintenance, everything is left to Krishna. Doesn't try to secure things, doesn't try to protect things that's already in his possession, leaves everything to Krishna. This is the point of Krishna consciousness. This is the point that we have to get to. So one might ask, well, how do we get there? Because here we are, and there that is. And we also have this very common phenomenon where devotees will say, aspiring devotees, especially younger devotees, they say, well, right now I don't have time to practice my Krishna consciousness, right? I have my family, I have my job, my duty, and I have to perform these things. It's a service to Krishna, but I have to go to work. I have to put food on the table. I have to make sure I provide enough, to send the kids through college, etc., like that. And what we can learn from today's verse, from the inhabitants of Vrindavan, is that even doing these things that seem mundane and material, we can be focused on Krishna. So, for example, if you're a mother and you're at home and your child is, going to school and you're preparing lunch for him, you don't say things like, okay, well, if my kid's not home at 1 o'clock when we do the offering on the home altar, then he tough noogies, he doesn't eat. No, we still prepare this food for Krishna, right? But it's going to be sent with my son, but it's for Krishna. We can develop that mentality, and we have to do it slowly. We can't just imitate it, of course. But we can start understanding, we start cooking the things that we know Krishna will like based on what is said in the Shastra. And that can be our meditation. We can be thinking, okay, well, because generally, after you prepare a foodstuff, you're meant to eat it within, like, I think 3 hours. Otherwise, it's considered, if it's food that's cooked longer than 3 hours ago is dear to you, then that means that you are influenced by the mode of ignorance in general. But we see the example that the cowherd boys, they were getting food that was prepared properly, that wouldn't go bad over that period of time, that wouldn't spoil. It doesn't, like that, and it was still prepared with love, and then it was offered and it was taken. So we can have that exact same meditation, right? So this is a way that we can practically strive to follow in the footsteps of the residents of Vrindavan, for example, to develop this Krishna consciousness, this idea that, okay, although I have to do these things to maintain body and soul together and to maintain family and to, do whatever job that I have, we can do all of these things being conscious of Krishna and cultivating our Krishna consciousness. Okay, so we talked about the thesis, we gave reasons for it, and then we also gave a personal, something that we could personally relate to. So now we'll sort of try to tie it all up together. So just as the residents in Vrindavan can perform all of their activities in full Krishna consciousness with no question of material reaction whatsoever, as was mentioned in the purport, we too can follow in their footsteps and gradually purify our consciousness so that we're able to engage in activities without material attachment. But instead of with material attachment, we do it with complete attachment to Krishna's service. And so Srila Prabhupada mentions in his purport to Bhagavad Gita 4:17, to understand all this, one has to associate with the authorities in Krishna consciousness and learn the secret from them. This is as good as learning from the Lord directly. Otherwise, even the most intelligent persons will be bewildered. We read that before. So, with the help of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, and with the strength of the cleansing power of the chanting of the holy name, we can effectively purify our consciousness by understanding the true distinction of action, forbidden action, and inaction, and applying that understanding in our daily lives, not just to understand it, but to apply it, not just the sambandha, but the abhideya, right? And that way we can attain the prayojana, which is actual association with Krishna. So here I'm going to make a very important disclaimer. It absolutely needs to be understood, because just because we are aware of Krishna, as I mentioned, just because we're aware of his presence and everything, just because we can quote the verses that talk about how, Bhaktaram Yajnatapa Samsarva Loka Maheshwaram, how every single thing is controlled and owned by the Lord. He's the benefactor of the sacrifices. He's the Lord of all the planets and demigods, etc. Just because we are aware of that, it doesn't mean that we are conscious of him. Understanding alone is not complete. The application must be there. And it can't be faked, right? It's not something that we can just, pretend and then we get the result. We actually have to cultivate it. And that's what our process is through Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. The reason this disclaimer is very important to understand is because if we are under the impression that we merely need to be aware of Krishna in our dealings to free ourselves from our actions, we're going to be sorely surprised when the concomitant results of our activities are served to us. We're going to think we're doing akarma, right? So we shouldn't get a reaction, but we will get a reaction if our consciousness is that we're doing this for ourselves. And if this happens, we'll think that the process has failed us. We'll think that, okay, well, it was just some bogus process. We tried it, but it was, it didn't work. So it must be, like I said, we like to pass the blame onto something else. So we'll blame the process. But the truth is, in that scenario, is the process hasn't failed us. We have failed the process because we didn't properly understand that we need to go beyond the theoretical understanding that Krishna is the controller, owner, enjoyer, maintainer, and so forth of everything. We actually have to act accordingly, right? So if I say, okay, everything belongs to Krishna, I can support that from Shastra. So, it has that authority behind it. But if I then just do whatever I want, I act according to my whims, according to my senses, that's not me acting as if I understand that Krishna is the owner of everything. I'm acting as if I'm the owner of these certain things that I'm trying to control and enjoy, right? So to act accordingly, that's the most important part. And this is the true test. We must become detached from everything material and attached exclusively to the spiritual nature. So another danger of having a partial understanding of this subject matter is that we can confuse the details with the principle. So I gave the example of food before. There's the right kind of food and the wrong kind of food. Well, among the right kind of food, as I mentioned, if it's offered in sacrifice, then you're dealing with akarma. If it's not, even if it's the right kind of food, then it's karma. So you get a positive result, but it's still a material positive result. So a common phenomenon these days with, vegetarians and vegans, etc., is that someone will say morally they're actually practicing a better diet than the devotees, because in the age of Kali, the cows, they're not treated very well. So if you're using that milk, you're supporting the slaughterhouse industry. And there is some point to that. But if you're just basing on material arguments, then you're not understanding the spiritual higher truth, right? So if this is the sort of thing that concerns you, which it should, then that means you start trying to get your milk from people who don't slaughter their cows. And better yet, get some cows and take care of them properly, because this is Krishna's favorite food, right? That comes from these cows that are taken care of, right? So we can also do this. But if we just try to base what we think is a higher or a lower moral standpoint without understanding what akarma and vikarma are and karma, then as Srila Prabhupada pointed out before, we're not going to get anywhere with that, no matter how intelligent we are. Let's see, how is it said? Otherwise, even the most intelligent persons will be bewildered. And we see that that is going on. People are bewildered by this. So in conclusion, as we started with, one can appear to be constantly engaged in common material activities, but factually be completely absorbed in Krishna service. I'm just going to quickly sum this up, and then we'll see if there are any questions or comments or corrections. So just to summarize, first we talked about the differences between action, forbidden action, and inaction. We mentioned that for aspiring Vaishnavas, there's only inaction and forbidden action, right? There's no third option because promotion to the heavenly planet is not an option for an aspiring Vaishnava. We identified the danger in not having a full understanding or misapplying the distinction between action, inaction, and forbidden action, and the pitfalls that result in having those misunderstandings or incomplete understandings. We also established that when properly applied with the help of the Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, and on the strength of chanting the holy name, we can appear to be constantly engaged in common material activities, but factually be completely absorbed in Krishna service. So I will stop here and see if there are any questions, comments, corrections, anything. Doesn't seem that there are any. Again, I apologize for logging in late. The time zone just changed, but that's not an excuse. I really should have set an alarm. I knew I had to start at 5:20 my time. And then all of a sudden at 5:36, I realized that the time was going. Dronacharya Prabhu, yes.
Hare Krishna, Charachandra Prabhu.
Hare
It's
Krishna.
always great to hear you, and thank you for coming to us all the way from Mayapur down.
Thank you.
You covered a lot of really important points for us to know, the application especially. As you were talking about just one part that really kind of stuck out to me as you were talking, and I'm not sure why it hit me so hard, was about the diet and meat eating. And it just struck me as you were saying that this world is really doomed. When you look at the population all over the world, not just here in America, but just all over the world, you know, animal consumption is a big part of people's diets and the economy.
Yeah.
And I mean, they have no, I mean, just the normal person just wakes up, grabs, breakfast, shoves it in their mouth. They stop at McDonald's or another, place to get eggs and bacon, and then they have a turkey sandwich for lunch, and then have, steak for dinner or some type of other meat product, fish or whatever it is. They consume a lot of dairy, that's not even, conscious of the fact of offering it or anything like that. I mean, is this really the state of like the world, and what do we do about it? Like, what do we do about it? Like, it just is like,
Yeah,
wow, this is like everybody. Like, we're talking like the 99.99% of population.
Majority. Yeah, as Kali Yuga progresses, it's going to get much worse. It's hard to believe that it can get worse, but believe that it can get worse. We're already exploiting one another, but it's going to get much worse, much more violent, much more lawless. Yeah, you can read about what's going to happen. What can we do about it? That's a great question. We can follow the Shastra, and we can become, because we're not necessarily yet, but we can become proper examples that Krishna consciousness is the only lifestyle that can deliver us from suffering, the only thing that can give us true happiness. That's it. That's all we can do, because the material world goes through this cycle, and it's always going to get worse until it gets completely destroyed or partially destroyed, and then, starts off better and then completely gets worse again. And so to try to counteract that is well, it's foolish if you're trying to counteract it with your own prowess. Now, if you're performing Sankirtan and you're trying to counteract the consciousness of it, not the actually what's going on, but the consciousness behind it, and you're helping people get out, then that's okay. If you're just trying to make people aware that eating meat is going to send you to a hellish planet that you can read all about in the 5th canto, and the different kinds of suffering that you'll endure there, sure, you might make someone a vegetarian, but you're not going to get them out of this material world unless you're actually addressing their consciousness. And so in order to do that, we have to address our consciousness. Once we can understand and apply the knowledge that what our relationship is with Krishna, that we are eternal servants and he is the complete whole. And once we start acting accordingly, then we can show an example to others. Because otherwise, what example are we showing? That vegetarianism is a healthier diet? Okay, sure. But is that helping? Maybe a little, but not much, right? And moreover, most people don't care about health. How many people are smoking? And the pack tells you that it's killing you in one way or another, whether it's cancer or whether it's giving birth defects to your children or, emphysema. It tells you right on it, but people still do it. So yeah, essentially what we have to do is forget about all this trying to make the world a better place materially, but trying to raise the consciousness of whoever's interested in raising their consciousness. And we have to start with ourselves. The more we understand and apply it, the easier it will be for us to convince others to understand and apply it. So the best thing we can do is focus on cultivating our own Krishna consciousness and helping whoever approaches us. And the preachers, they'll also just approach other people, and that's great. If they have the strength to do it and they can do it, that's wonderful. But yeah, this always has to be the focus. It can't just be on, let's try to make the world more aware that meat is murder and it's a bad karmic thing. No, we have to focus on the consciousness, and that's just a byproduct. Because otherwise, we can create a bunch of people that think morally they're on a higher ground because they're eating food which in their eyes has less karmic bondage. Like, so there are fruitarians, for example, that they won't, if the vegetable, actually, if the plant that you're taking it from dies because of taking it, fruitarian won't eat that. They'll only eat things that, like a tree that has apples on it. The tree lets go of the apple, the tree still lives and it keeps giving apples. So they'll take things like that. But they won't take like a carrot, for example, because that's the root of the thing. And so if you take that, then it can no longer, you killed it, right? So they could make an argument just based on logic that karmically that's bad because you're killing a living entity, right? So if we're just talking about logic and things like that, and we're not consulting Shastra, then, like Srila Prabhupada said, we will be bewildered because we'll think it makes a whole lot of sense. And it will make a whole lot of sense to us, but we won't truly understand what's going on. Because the fact of the matter is, this material world, it's temporary. We don't belong here. So trying to make it a better place materially, it's foolish. It's a waste of time. But if we focus on our consciousness, then there's hope. And then we can also help others, help just, put your own mask on and then help the person next to you. And that's how we can become productive preachers. Did that answer your question, Prabhu?
Very nicely. No, that was good. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Is there anything else? Oh, I just wanted to point out, since we have a little bit of time. So today I actually, even though I didn't log in on time, I had enough time to actually prepare this class. And what I did was I prepared it according to what's called Panchanga Nyaya. So in the Nyaya Shastra, which talks about how to logically present things in a effective manner, it gives a very effective way of presenting a point to make it as easily assimilatable as possible. And so Srila Prabhupada talks about this in Chaitanya Charitamrita, but moreover, he actually follows this in his purports. So if we understand what Panchanga Nyaya is, we can actually see that, oh, Srila Prabhupada is following it. Just like today we pointed out that Srila Prabhupada was talking about Sambandha and Abhideya in the purport very clearly, but he didn't use those terms. So he doesn't always use the terms, but when we understand them, we can start seeing, oh, this is what's going on. So I did mention that first we had a thesis, which is Shabda. It's from what we hear from Shastra. But since some people don't have the necessary faith yet, then you have to use Anuman. You have to use logic to infer that what is being said in Shastra can actually be understood, right? And then you bring it to Pratyaksha. You use an example that you've had personal experience with that somehow relates back. Then after you do that, you show the relation back and then restate the thesis as a conclusion. And so if we can get in a habit of doing this, we'll see that people will understand us much more clearly, because this is the scientific way that logic is presented. So yeah, we will see that Srila Prabhupada, when he does his purports, this is what he does. He'll state the thesis of the verse, then he'll start logically explaining it, all with Shastric reference to give it authority. Then he'll say, just like when you are doing this, something that's relatable to what you're doing, and then he shows how that relation goes back to the thesis, and then gives the conclusion. So fortunately, I was able to actually put it in that format. So I don't know if today's class was more easily understood, or maybe it was more confusing because I kind of rushed through it. But I just thought I'd mention that it's something worth understanding sometime in the future if we have time, and if we're preachers especially, how to present things according to Panchanga Nyaya, like Srila Prabhupada did. Okay. If there's nothing else, we can stop here. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Mahaprema Vesh is here with me too, but I won't turn my camera toward him. He was on Parikram all day, so he's a little tired.
Tell him we said Haribo.
Everybody says Haribo.
Haribo.
Yeah. Okay. Have a very Krishna conscious day, everyone.
Tell them devotees are going out on Harinam Sankirtan today at Temple
Everyone's
University.
going on Harinam Sankirtan at Temple University today.
Jai.
He's very happy about that. Good. Jai.